Hey everybody, Will Miles here from Read and Reaction, coming to you Sunday morning. Appreciate the patience not getting this post-game show out. We didn't get into where we were trying to get to on Saturday night until it was early Sunday morning. Otherwise, would have had this up after the game. I was actually watching the game while I was on the plane, and then watching it while sitting in the car rental line. So this version of the Read and Reaction post-game show not brought to you by Enterprise Car Rental, because we got there and they did not have the minivan that we needed for our giant family. And so it's turned into quite the fiasco. But anyway, appreciate your patience. Appreciate you supporting us here on Patreon. And hopefully you get value out of this, even though it's a day after. Haven't had a chance to write my post-game article either. That'll be coming up either later today or early tomorrow morning, and hopefully everybody will check that out over at readandreaction.com. Big news for the website, or at least big news for the people who put up the website. So Nick Knudsen and his wife Erica have had their first child, a son. Everybody's happy, healthy in the hospital right now. I'm getting ready to get discharged. So obviously, Nick's incapacitated. We're going to allow him a little bit of time to get back to the real world. Though he says he's going to do a podcast this week with me, but we'll see. I may have to strong arm him into not doing that, just because I know what it's like when you got a kid, and more than anything, know what it's like when you've got when you've got somebody in the when you've got somebody in that situation where you got to take care of them. So, um, anyway, if you want to leave comments down the lower right hand side, you can do that, and I'll read them off and answer questions as we go. Marlon says, "Congratulations, we need more baby Gators." Well, I've contributed 4, and Nick's on 1 now, so he's got to catch up with me. So hopefully he's able to do that. Um, Over the course of his life, as the website grows and he can support those kids out there. So let's get to the Missouri game. I think there's some good, there's some bad. Obviously, there's stuff we need to talk about. Just like every game this year, Florida made a lot of mistakes. Those mistakes come back and haunt them in a one-score game. They're now 1-2 in one-score games this year. I saw one of my friends on Twitter had tweeted that. Florida's just a couple of plays away from being 7-4. It's absolutely true. Florida's also a couple of plays away against South Carolina of being 4-7, and that's the rub with these one-score games. I actually have something coming out later this week talking about one-score games, talking about coaching and getting into those one-score games, whether you win them, and those sorts of things. That'll hopefully everybody will get something interesting out of that. This is about as close as a game can be. So you look at the total yardage, and the total yardage is 500 to 508. So Missouri wins by 8 yards. The yards per play, 7.6 for both teams. So those are really sort of elite level offenses. Um, and Florida ends up averaging 6.5 yards per rush for the game, 9.2 yards per attempt. Missouri averages 5.5 yards per rush, 9.5 yards per attempt. So really, from an offensive perspective, given what we saw, I think it's actually pretty nice. Um, the offense did its job in this one specifically. The problem is that 7.6 yards per attempt for Missouri on the back end, and specifically, it's the third and fourth quarter. So Missouri, 275 yards passing in the second half. After 56 yards passing in the first half, they absolutely shut down Brady Cook in the first half. 13 attempts, 4.3 yards per attempt, and he only had 4 rushes for 7 yards in that first half. Yards above replacement, my stat had him at negative 2.84. The problem is Graham Mertz wasn't much better. Mertz, 17 attempts for 95 yards. He had the one big play to Pearsall, 4 rush, 2 yards. His yard, negative 2.15. So the quarterbacks in the first half, kind of a wash. That's how you end up 13-7 at the half. Florida wasn't able to take advantage of a couple of their things. Missouri was. You had the turnover for Mertz that turns into a field goal, and that's how you end up that way. Mertz, great in the second half. He only had 4 attempts, but he had the 4 attempts for 88 yards, so averaged 22 yards per throw, 1 rush for 11 yards. So again, adding value there. Overall for the game, 21 attempts, 183 yards, 8.7 yards per attempt, 5 rushes for 13 yards, a yards above replacement of 0.78. So above average, kind of in the Jake Frommey 2017 range, not elite. Max Brown, however, comes in 5 attempts, 56 yards. Obviously, hits the one big play down the sideline to Khalil Jackson, but right before that, hit a big time slant on fourth down. The thing that he adds: 7 rushes for 42 yards, 6 yards a rush. His yards above replacement 3.35. He really brought something to the offense. You could see it. Jesse Palmer mentioned it on the broadcast that he opened things up. Certainly in my post game article tomorrow, I will be highlighting those sorts sorts of things that you can see. So Brady Cook, 21 attempts for 275 yards, so 13.1 yards per attempt, 3 rushes for 4 yards. It's funny, I actually thought he was probably going to take advantage of Florida on the ground. He wasn't able to do that. 7 rushes for 11 yards. His yards above replacement for the game, right in line with his season, 1.48. And so at the end of the day, that's one of the things that really sort of restricts what. I mean, 1.48 for yards above replacement is really good, and the 21 attempts for 275 yards in the second half, not great. From an explosive play perspective, Florida actually out explosived Missouri. That's how they stayed in the game. You obviously had the 61-yard pass to Pearsall, but then the second touchdown in the second half comes on a 30-yard run for ETN, sets that one up. Then you've got the next drive after that, 37-yard pass to ETN and a 38-yard pass to Hansen. I'm sorry, you had a run and a pass for ETN on the same drive for a touchdown to open up the second half. Then a couple drives later, you got a 38-yard pass to Hayden Hansen, a 39-yard run for Pearsall. Then here's the big one. You had a 26-yard run for Montrell Johnson, sets them up in scoring position. The offense fumbles the ball. Max Brown doesn't get the handoff to Montrell Johnson. Ball ends up on the ground. They don't get anything out of that explosive play. That's obviously going to come back and haunt them later. Then they had a 27-yard pass to Jackson from Brown on the touchdown drive to get them back into position to then kick the go-ahead field goal. They had a 27-yard run for Brown on a read option around the sideline. Mizzou had 2 big plays in the first half, turned that into 10 points, both runs by Schrader. Then in the second half, everything shifted to where they were able to get the job done through the air. So 3 explosive passes to Burden, 38 yards, 48 yards, and 27 yards. The 27-yarder, obviously the killer on the 4th and 17, able to get the field goal on that one. The other 2 turned into touchdowns and field goals, and then the 77-yard pass to Weiss on what is essentially a flood route that Florida should be able to guard out there on the sideline. Overall, you got 67 plays for Missouri, 508 yards, 7.6 yards per play. For Florida on the offensive side, 66 plays, 500 yards, 7.6 yards per play. 8 explosive plays for Florida, 35.6 yards per play. On the non-explosive plays, Florida averaged 3.7 yards per play, and Missouri averaged 4.0 yards per play. So really, this game could have shifted one way or the other on one play or the other, and really the 2 turnovers for Florida is probably where that lies. So, my overall thoughts for the game, obviously the Mertz interception and the Brown fumble are killers. Those 2 specifically, you can't lose a turnover battle on the road against a top 10 opponent. Florida loses the turnover battle 2-0. Give up points at least on the Brown fumble. Absolutely. But even on the Mertz interception, had that been a complete pass, had he hit him, because he overthrew him a little bit, if he hits Boardingham, they're in field goal range. So Florida at least gave up 6 points with those 2 turnovers. And the fact that the defense couldn't get a stop going the other direction, I mean, especially after the Brown fumble, 2 plays, 81 yards and a touchdown. That's been a theme all year long for the defense, is giving up those sorts of things. You know, obviously Brown comes in, does a really nice job, 6 of 7 for 50 yards and 1 rush for 0 yards coming into the game. And this, I think, actually, Billy Napier's going to get criticism for in-game stuff, and rightly so. He's gotten criticized for that. My biggest criticism of him in some of the games has been that when Florida's either gotten way ahead or gotten way behind, he hasn't gotten Max Brown any reps. So you think about the game against McNeese. They were way up. They left Mertz in there for a long time, and then when they brought in Max Brown, they also brought in the 3rd-string quarterback on the walk-on. I can't remember his name. I apologize, but the walk-on, and they split reps. But that if Mertz goes down, you would like to have had those reps for Max Brown, and I think that showed on the couple of stretch plays. I mean, obviously there was one for the fumble, but there was the one later, which goes to another mistake that was made, which is ETN running out of bounds on 3rd down, saves Missouri a timeout. They call that timeout before the 4th and 17 play, and then obviously convert the 4th and 17 to Burden there after that timeout. Also, a bunch of false starts to put the offense in a bad situation in the first half. They were able to overcome holding with an explosive play, but hey, at the end of the day, on the road, too many false starts, too many turnovers, that sort of stuff. So Keith Carlaw says, did the team surprise you that it was close? Absolutely. I think I had the score 42-17. I thought Missouri had an advantage in every single statistical category. And Florida's defense, at least in the first half, was able to come out and stop Missouri's offense and keep the game close. But again, just like it was against LSU last week, Florida's offense was not able to take advantage of the fact that Florida's defense was able to get a couple of stops. And this isn't a defense that's going to get a stop every single time. This is a defense that's going to get stops from time to time, but they're not going to get consistent stops against an offense like Missouri, which isn't as good as LSU, but still very, very good. You knew that at some point that barrage was coming. And when they left them with a minute 20 left in the fourth quarter, did anybody have any confidence that they weren't going to be able to march right down the field, get into field goal range? They almost got the job done, but again, almost doesn't matter. If moral victories don't matter, certainly not in the SEC. And I think that's one of the things that that Florida is going to have to account for moving forward is, Napier is going to have to coach as though the defense can't get a stop. And so that might mean draining the clock better. And that's where ETN going out of bounds. They ran a stretch play. You didn't have to run a stretch play. You could have run a read option, could have run a dive, could have run anything to get yourself in position and force Missouri to use that field goal. Time was your friend, and they didn't necessarily use it there. Smokey Gator says, what kind of job do you think Billy Napier would get if he got fired? Another head coaching job, certainly not an offensive coordinator anywhere. I think he'd be fine as an offensive coordinator. I think the idea that Billy Napier's offense is the problem this year is belied by the fact that his offense keeps putting up 30 plus points and Florida keeps losing because the defense can't get off the field. I think if you look at the Utah game, certainly the offense had some things to be desired. In the first few plays against Kentucky, the offense also had something to be desired. It's not necessarily like some elite unit where you look at it and say it's the best in the world, but did we really expect that with Graham Mertz at quarterback? I think is the question we should ask. Mertz has exceeded most expectations. He said, I wrote an article like in February or March where I said what his peak would be or his absolute ceiling would be, and I said it's going to be about around yards above replacement around zero, so average, and it's going to be a QB rating of like 156, 157. So really good through the air, adding nothing, and even negatively adding stuff through the ground. That's exactly what's happened this year. So Napier's gotten the most out of him. Now the problem is, and Smokey Gator I see just says special teams are horrible too. That's the problem. The problem with not having an offensive coordinator is that Billy Napier's not just responsible for the offense. He's responsible for the defense. He's responsible for the special teams. He's responsible for recruiting. He's responsible for all those different things. So if something is falling through the cracks in any of those things, then that falls on Napier eventually, or really ultimately. And that's the problem, is that those things have cracks. The false starts, the penalties, the game management, the special teams gaffes, the recruiting flips recently, all those sorts of things are things that really sort of are Napier's responsibility. That's why he needs an offensive coordinator. Would he get another head coaching job? Most guys who get fired from a big time job like this take a year off and go be a commentator somewhere. And I don't think Napier has that in his future. I think the reality is that Napier is going to probably latch on somewhere as a head coach at a level like Louisiana. He did a really nice job there at Louisiana, turning that program around. Now, a lot of that was dependent on one score victories, but there are going to be people who are going to ignore that. He's got a pretty good eye for talent, especially at that level. And so that's where he'd end up if Florida let him go. Now, look, we're still 1 or 2 years away from that happening. DJ Lagway is the key to Napier. That's just the reality. Is if Lagway comes in and plays great, or hey, if Max Brown turns out to be as good as he looked last night, then Napier's going to have a long, illustrious career at Florida, because that's what it really comes down to. If you're not recruiting at a truly elite level, Alabama and Georgia, and honestly, if you didn't have somebody sort of stacking the deck before you got there, like Kirby got lucky in terms of having Mark Richt giving him high levels of talent. That first SEC championship that he won had. That first SEC championship that he won had Jake Fromm, certainly from his recruiting class, but all SEC players were from the previous regime, and Napier doesn't have that luxury, and so he's had to do it with the guys he has. He's made a specific um, decision to go young, and that's one of the things that's hurting Florida right now. So Marlon Dawes says O-line and D-line portal ads are needed. We need quality experience quick. I think the portal makes or breaks Billy next year. Lagway is going to make or break Billy. That's the reality. If Florida's entertaining, if they're scoring 45 points a game, they're going to win 7, 8 games, irrespective of the opponents. You're not losing the games they've lost this year if you're putting up an extra 1 or 2 touchdowns a game, irrespective of how bad the defense is. And I agree with all the comments that are coming in about him being able to play linebacker. And no, Lagway won't be able to play linebacker. I think the big thing that you've seen is that Florida can't get pressure up the middle. Defensive tackle is specific. I think the O-line actually sort of acquitted themselves pretty well yesterday. Certainly the addition of Brown brought a running component that opened things up for ETN and Montreal Johnson. They were already starting to get it going there in the second half, but if I go back to my stats and actually look, at what they were able to accomplish in the first half. So first half rushing, they had 13 rushes for 58 yards. They end up with 40 for 261. So they put up over 200 yards rushing in the second half. A lot of that was after Brown came in, and they were able to really open things up. So Rob S says, disagree, Will. The defense gave up 700 yards last game. We know what they are. Don't play for a field goal at the end and play aggressive to get the first down. Game's over without relying on the D. Yeah, I think you can absolutely criticize Napier for not going hardcore at that first for the first down there. But also with a reality that he's got the backup quarterback there. Now, my point from a couple of minutes ago stands where if you'd gotten that backup quarterback more reps, then maybe he feels like he can do that and go after it and be aggressive. Look, when you're on the road and you're an underdog and you have an opportunity to put somebody away, you got to do it. Same thing if you score a touchdown to be down a point and you're on the road and you're an underdog, you should go for two. The analytics suggest that. Same thing. I think you should probably throw the ball there, especially because of what Missouri is expecting. But look, ETN needs to stay in bounds. That's the reality too. So Rob says that 26-yard touchdown for Montreal Johnson would have been a 26-yard run for Montreal Johnson would have been a touchdown with ETN. Yeah, absolutely. But we also saw ETN completely Olay pass protection earlier in the game. And as much as I love ETN, and I think he's special, he's going to have to get better at some of those aspects of the game to be in there. They trust Montreal Johnson to protect the quarterback. And considering they just had the quarterback get knocked out, and look, the hit that Mertz took obviously was because of Mertz. At the same time, at the same time, it's it, Mertz was hurt before that hit, right? He was flexing his knee earlier. There were other things going on. Let's see. Rob S says facts. One thing about Mullen, he used to get his backups reps in meaningful games. Yeah, absolutely. No, I think sometimes we complained about that, but Mullen is definitely, at least at this point, a better on-field coach than Billy Napier. But Mullen couldn't recruit, and Kirby knew it, and Kirby was in his head, and they were going to struggle with that. And Napier was brought here to fix that. Do you lose something on the field with Napier? That's what it looks like. It looks like you lose something on the field. But that's going to be the question is, can he bring in those elite guys who are going to be able to make it to where he doesn't need to maximize the potential of everybody on the field every single week? And we'll see whether he can do that in the next year or two. So Smokey Gator said special teams are horrible too. Hey, no gaffes last night. Pretty good punt coverage, good punts. Progress, right? Whether or not the whole year it's been awful, yeah, I agree with you. It's been tough, but progress. Rob S says, Will, does it seem as if Mertz has been protecting his completion percentage since the bye week? I don't think he's been protecting it. I think that he's limited, and the South Carolina game was an aberration, not a growth point. And I think everybody wants to look at one game and say, hey, this is where somebody grew, but that's not what happened. What happened is that Mertz had a good game against South Carolina, had opportunities to take deep shots. He was able to hit the deep shots. And now at this point, he is what he is, where his yards per completion is going to be really low. His completion percentage is going to be high. Pretty accurate within the flow of the offense, but not a game changer. And that's sort of the reality. So JB says Lagway facing the defense. Chad Anderson says Lagway going to play linebacker with a question mark. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, Florida's defense is going to have to improve. The difference is as these guys get older, as this new recruiting class gets in, and as they hit guys in the transfer portal, it's going to get better. Now, are the people in place, specifically Austin Armstrong, the right people to get that going? That's an open question, and I didn't like the Armstrong hire from the start. You can go back and look on the website, and I was joking a little bit joking at the time, but I said I hated the hire with the heat of 1,000 suns. His track record doesn't really fit what I think you need to do schematically in order to win in the SEC and really win the way Saban and Kirby Smart have. So that's one of the things you got to sort of figure out as you go forward. But let's see. Rob S says, yeah, but when the D actually gets stopped, Lagway won't go 3 and out on 3 consecutive drives. He's going to start with. Lagway's going to struggle just like anybody. And honestly, what we saw from Max Brown, I think, is the thing when you start talking about stopgaps, and it was sort of expected that Mertz was going to have the starting job next year, and Lagway might take over at some point in the not too distant future. You got to wonder whether Brown, with a game at Florida State, potentially a bowl game, if you can get that one over Florida State, because Florida State's got some quarterback problems too now. If they get a win over Florida State, they can get all of the bowl practices. If Brown can play in a bowl game, all of a sudden, who knows? You get a real battle. And we saw something from Brown where he's definitely had something on the ground. And even the play that he went outside to Jackson, that was a one-on-one play. He threw it where his guy could get it. He didn't try to make a perfect throw. Jackson had to make a great play, but it's one-on-one right to him. All right, so somebody says sound's getting choppy. So hold on. Hopefully we can get that updated here. And YouTube's lagging. That would be why. All right, so I'm going to keep going here. Hopefully, it'll update for everybody. So our defense lacks mean dudes like Spikes and Elam. Seems we have a nice bunch of quiet guys. Need someone to come forth and get in everyone's face and set the tone. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they need some attitude on that side of the defense. They need some people to come up and actually set the stage. The one play from Jackson where Jackson came in and hit the guy in the backfield, but that was really it. That was the only thing that we saw. Do any of our starters transfer? If so, who? I think obviously there's tampering going on all over the place. Hopefully Florida's tampering too. Hopefully they're out there trying to add to the roster as opposed to detract from it. I don't think ETN's somebody who transfers unless he's unhappy with the amount of carries that he's getting, because he's one of those special guys that you figure if you needed to update an NIL situation, you would do that. For a guy like ETN, you need him on the ground. We saw Frank's and Track's situation all over again last night from Q Lee. Yeah, it looked like it. It's one of those things that we've been wondering all year. I wrote an article real early on saying Brown is the guy with the upside. I think we saw some of it. Obviously, we saw some of the downside of a young guy with the fumble. The issue is you'd rather have that first, second, third game of the year so that by the time you get to this point, you don't have to deal with that. But hey, that's where we are at this point. Nicholas M says, Will, you got to stop saying Florida will have just 8 wins next year. Florida gets a lot back. A lot of teams in the schedule lose a lot. Yeah, but you've seen that schedule: Texas, Oklahoma, LSU, Georgia, Tennessee, Miami, Florida State. That's a big time schedule. And we've seen it. One of the arguments about the SEC being the better conference than every other conference is that it's not that you have to play Alabama, it's that you have to play Alabama, Georgia, Auburn, LSU, and Ole Miss all in one specific order, and that's the thing that makes it difficult for the SEC. So Rob S says, Q Lee, you think Brown could be Trask? And he says, no, he's just a better fit for what Taggart, meaning Napier, wants to do the merge. Yeah, everything opened up. You could see it open up when they started running the read option. Let's see, Q Lee, when number 76 got out, you can really see the vision that Napier really wants to do. I'm not going to call Taggart. I refuse to do that at this point. But look, that's the reality. The reality is that a running quarterback opens up your running game. If you added Anthony Richardson's running games and you removed Graham Mertz's running game from it, the rushing ledger actually looks pretty similar to what it did last year. And so adding that into the component means that you can get away with some shortcomings on the offensive line. And with Graham Mertz, you just can't do that. Rob S. Will, I know you've been critical on Armstrong. Do you see anything he does well where getting the right players will help? I mean, look, I think he's tried a lot of different things. I think he doesn't have the personnel to pull off a lot of the things he's trying. Seth Varnador last week wrote something about the creepers where he had Human Milan in coverage a lot. I think that's a problem. He definitely had Human Milan rushing the passer much more this week than he has had him dropping into coverage. I think the effort that he's getting from those players is impressive, right? Like you get to this point, you're 5-5, you've lost a bunch of games. I get that you play for pride and all that sort of stuff, but it's easy to be on the road and sort of go, we'll get the one against Florida State, or that's the one that we'll get up for, that sort of stuff. They were up for this one, and that's good. So anyway, I think Q Lee says it wasn't a coincidence. As soon as 76 got out, it was no more holding and false starts. Shane says 4th and 17. God, they suck. Yeah, not necessarily wrong. I mean, look, Florida had an opportunity here, just like they had an opportunity against Arkansas to get the field goal, and they screwed that one up. They had an opportunity on 4th and 17 with a timeout beforehand to set up, and weren't able to do it. And Nicholas says, I'm not giving this team any excuses. They should beat everyone except Georgia and maybe Texas if healthy. Absolutely. They should be competitive with everybody in the East. They were able to beat Tennessee. Now, Tennessee got absolutely slaughtered by Georgia yesterday. If you look at Arkansas, they were behind Cupcake. When I saw that, Auburn got beat by Cupcake. So it's not like the SEC this year is head and shoulders above everybody else. It's going to get better. Obviously, Auburn and Hugh Freeze are recruiting at a very high level. Alabama's not going away. Georgia's not going away. And you got Texas and Oklahoma coming in. So you're going to have to pick it up. But again, I picked Florida to lose by 25 in this one. They end up losing on a last-second field goal. There are no more victories. You got to get the win. At the same time, I struggle to criticize the coaching staff or criticize anybody other than right now, this team isn't very good. And so when they have an opportunity to get the win, they haven't been able to do it so far. And look, 1-2 in one-score games. Hopefully, usually you go 500 in those games. Hopefully next week's another one-score game against Florida State, especially since I'm going to the game. And hopefully the good guys pull it out. But, at the end of the day, I'm really excited to see what Max Brown has. I'm actually really intrigued to see what Florida State's going to have now that Jordan Travis is out. That has always been sort of my contention, is you needed to find a quarterback who could make your thing go if you weren't going to recruit it an elite level. That's what Norvell had done. He had Jordan Travis fall into his lap last year and develop. And look, you gave him a lot of credit for developing him, but in many cases, I sort of tend to think that quarterbacks aren't necessarily developed. And I think it's you take a Graham Mertz from Wisconsin who struggled, maybe you get the maximum away from him. You you know you but if you bring in an elite prospect, maybe you get the maximum out of him. And so that'll be the question. So I think Florida learned a lot in this game. There's been a lot of talk about George, and then you got Cameron Waits and other guys in the game. Certainly there might be an opportunity there to make some switches based on what we see on film, and the confidence that these guys are going to have in somebody like Max Brown, who went out on the road, took some bullets, and was able to succeed, as opposed to Tate Rodemaker, who had to really struggle or had to really put things together there against North Alabama or whoever they were playing. Um, so anyway, I think that's sort of where we sit. Looks like I made this live on YouTube as opposed to live for Patreon subscribers. So hey, everybody gets a free one this week. If you like these sort of post game recaps, go over to readandreaction.com/Patreon. Usually right after the game, we'll have something like this. And certainly had to delay on this one because of my travel plans and Nick's family plans, but we'll plan on having something up hopefully next week right after the game. And so head over to Patreon, subscribe for that, support us over there. Really appreciate the people who support us over there. It helps us to do this sort of stuff, helps us to do helps us to have an understanding that people value this stuff, and that it's worth our time to do it, and then also helps pay when the little babies come into town. So anyway, really appreciate it. Florida loses last second to Missouri, some good, some bad, but hopefully we get that win, the bowl eligibility. Hopefully we get to see Max Brown turn into Kyle Trask, like Q Lee's saying over there, next week against Florida State. And as always, go Gators.